Oh hey, I'm glad you're here. Our Season 13, The Season of Chaos, continues with our first Cinema Time Capsule episode. Time is weird. It's a weird way to measure things. 1 minute can seem so brief and yet also feel like it stretches on for an infinity. Just ask anyone who's been a parent. My years growing up in the aisles of a video store seemed like a handful of days, but it was my life. My kid face lit by the warm glow of the cathode ray as my eyes darted around the screen so as to not miss a second of Heather Thomas in Cyclone. Love that motorcycle. Sitting on the floor of the horror section looking at the bottom shelf where the Future Kill box was and wondering, the whole cast of Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Really? A lot of it is a blur, but a very fun blur to pause and look at, I don't know, 5 years? Who was doing what was the vibe like in that time frame, and to marvel at what we will have forever thanks to people's creative drive and efforts. So I'll keep this short, rather than expanding it to an excruciating length, but I will say, we need your support. So please join us on Patreon so we can continue with Season 14 after all this chaos. Visit our Threadless shop where all of our original art is located. You can get it on shirts and stickers, all kinds of stuff. And please subscribe, rate, and review anything you enjoy by anyone. Just take a moment. It really does make a difference. And it's always, always appreciated. So let's get right to it. The episode is the Cinema Time Capsule. Our guest is Aaron Brown, and this is VH Us. Hello, and welcome to VHS Presents a Cinema Time Capsule episode. I'm your host, Dirk Marshall, and I'm introducing a new alternate format, which will be up on the table of choices, which I will rotate throughout future seasons. My first guest for this new format is Aaron W. Brown. Welcome to VHS.
Thanks, Dirk. So glad to be here. Totally an honor. Thank you.
First, I wanted to say, I think congratulations on wrapping principal photography of a film. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. It just finished this last month.
That's awesome. Is there anything you could tell us about it?
Yes. So I shot it all on location here in Las Vegas, in the Henderson area. Pretty much I was the crew.
Nice.
So it was crazy. And I just said, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And I took some PTO off from work and got a really solid cast together and went ahead and did it. And it's about a young lady who's writing a play, and we just follow her in the course of a couple of days. And she's having issues. Someone is either stalking her or she's kind of losing her mind. And as she gets further into her play, so it kind of goes a little psychological thriller route. Also, we're kind of going to see if she's going to come out on the other side okay, or if she's going to go ahead and tailspin.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a title you can reveal?
It's called Lolly Dagger Eats Sponge Cake.
Okay, perfect.
The premise is she sees this written on a brick wall. That's her name, is Lolly Dagger. And she's on the phone with her friend. She's like, wait a second, someone just wrote this what does this mean? And so she begins trying to figure out what this could mean and what it has to do with her. Why is someone writing her name, and what does sponge cake mean? And that becomes like the driving force of her evening and her couple of days.
Okay, that's
so
fantastic.
There's a lot of dark comedy in it also. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, congratulations. That's really exciting.
Thank you, Dirk. I appreciate it. This show has been such an inspiration. I really, like I was telling you earlier, I like to have things on when I'm doing my creative projects in between my downtime to keep that, creativity and inspiration flowing. So thanks again for what you do and for having me.
No, thank you. Now, listeners, you're probably asking yourself, what is a Cinema Time Capsule episode? Well, we'll be looking at 2 directors spanning 5 years, with the result being 6 films. The years we're looking at is 1986 to 1991, and those directors are Jim Jarmusch and David Cronenberg. 86 is neither a starting year for either director, but that's just where we're starting. So we start in 1986 when the top 3 at the box office are Top Gun, Crocodile Dundee, and Platoon. It's a year where Rodney Dangerfield's Back to School outgrossed Aliens, if you can believe that. And in real life, Arnold Schwarzenegger married Maria Shriver. Also, Timothy Dalton was announced as the next James Bond, and in music, Depeche Mode releases Black Celebration, Love and Rockets releases Express, and the Dead Milkmen release Eat Your Paisley. However, top of the charts was Dionne Warwick and Friends with That's What Friends Are For, Say You, Say Me by Lionel Richie, and I Miss You by Climax, which I somehow missed that completely. It's wild times indeed, but also this year we got Down by Law and The Fly, two films with characters breaking laws. The first film we'll be talking about is Down by Law. What's your history with this film?
So I became fascinated with Jim Jarmusch in my 20s after Stranger Than Paradise. And then I rented on video Down by Law, and I was completely blown away with his approach to filmmaking. I thought maybe with Stranger Than Paradise that, that was sort of like an experiment, but he continued it, with these master shots of people that were just on the fringes of society and them being thrown together, and we're like, hey, we're hanging out and you want so bad to know more.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, it got me hooked. This one and Stranger Than Paradise got me hooked on him
That's
for
fantastic.
sure.
My introduction was his next film, and then I went backwards to Down by Law and Stranger Than Paradise. And also, when I studied independent cinema, Down by Law was like the film for some reason that the teachers would always use for his catalog, and I love it. I mean I love the first. I mean, so I love so many of his movies. It's so crazy, like preparing for this episode, because I was just like, oh yeah, I remember I love this, even though I haven't watched it like every day for a week in a while. But man, it's so good. Yeah. So for people that don't know, it's a film directed by Jim. It stars Tom Waits, John Lurie, and Roberto Benigni. It centers on the arrest, incarceration, and escape of three men from jail. Oh man, should have just started with the fact that it's got Robbie Mueller's cinematography in the film. I mean,
Uh,
it's
yes,
it's crazy.
that inspired a little bit. I have a short film I did before this, but that opening shots of him just that passing by through the city, I was like, I'm gonna lift that.
Yeah, yeah,
That's a great way to open a movie.
yeah. Oh, I mean, and the fact that like the way that Robbie Mueller likes to work is he shows up and then is a collaborative person working with the director. So, you know, Jim Jarmusch hates to do like shot lists and everything. It's just a very collaborative filmmaking approach. And that sort of like looseness you would think would be sloppy. And instead, the camera work in the films where he works with Robbie, which is a lot, it's so concise and so
Oh,
like just the precision on these things. It's just so good. And he, Jim comes from a school of film, or a fan of films before the MTV influence of quick cuts. And so you have these long breaths of time, and you can feel like the Vim Vendors in Jim Jarmusch. Like it's just so much like the ability to focus on time between actions and the things that you would normally not see portrayed in a film. He's interested in that, and I love that. And I think we get a lot of the richness of characters from being in those moments rather than punctuated by these actions. Also of note, I did find this. It's a note written to Vim by Jim after seeing Paris, Texas. And so I will just read that right now. It says, Vim, your film is one of the most beautiful I've seen in a long, long time. I just wanted to tell you that it had a very strong effect on me. Congratulations for such beautiful work. Also, the cinematography is amazing. Robbie Mueller is, I feel, the greatest living cinematographer. I hope I can see you sometime here in Cannes. Thank you for Paris, Texas.
oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, what a
I
beautiful
oh,
thing for a filmmaker to write to another filmmaker. It gives me goosebumps just thinking
yeah, me
about
too. I
it.
just got chills. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
it's just so cool.
And I forgot the Van Bender's connection with Robbie Mueller. Also,
Yeah,
that's incredible.
yeah. It's one of those things. The pace of Jim's films was something that'll probably keep coming up, but it's something that
Yes,
I think is haunted, or not haunted, but yeah, I'll use the word haunted. His more recent films, where he's working with like say Bill Murray and these, the uh, zombie movie, and it's like I know people that saw that and they were like, this movie's a little slow, and I was like, oh, is it? Is the Jim Jarmusch movie a little slow for you?
I heard that too. I was like, he is slow.
Yeah,
Like
he says
that's
it himself. His manner of speech, everything about him is like that. It's like you wouldn't tell
just chill.
Stephen Wright to speed it up when he's telling you a joke. It's like there's
It's a
it's just that's the person's pace, and it works so well in the format that he's expressing himself, whether that's music. I will throw collage in there because I truly believe that collage is an aspect of his filmmaking, and in his music there is a sprawling kind of quality to it, but it's not ever, I think, wasting your time or being
no.
self-indulgent. And in this movie there's so many beautiful moments, but
Yeah, what's interesting is he's hanging out with John Lurie and Tom Waits, and like you're saying, rewatching it again, I thought, oh, I've seen it so many times, but then I was like, wow, every
Yeah.
time I watch this, it was like I was so excited. I put it on again. I had to sit down and just take it all in again. Him hanging out with these characters, John Lurie and Tom Waits, just like we just said, taking that time,
Yeah.
seeing how the scenes develop. We get to know them, even though there's dialogue, we get to know them through behavior,
Mm-hmm.
then their environment, what's going on around them. And then when we make the transition to the jail, I was like, I didn't realize we don't have a backstory on Roberto
No,
Benigni.
none.
He
Yeah.
just he just shows up.
Yes.
He's the element of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that is so brilliant because all of a sudden he shows up. And then I realized also just how deep that movie. I was like, there's a lot going on right now.
Yeah.
And I things that's the way movies are, they grow with you, I guess. And
Well, it's something
there,
that I think also is like when people are discussing Jim Jarmusch films, it's either that, from a point of view they really appreciate his work or a point of view where they're like, it's not a lot going on. And I would argue there's always a lot going on, but it's under the surface a lot of times. And it's through like the rewatching and exploring that you're like, oh, this. Because if you're not kind of looking for those kinds of things and you're just hanging out, it's still a completely enjoyable watch, I think. But once you start to dig in there and realize like, oh, the language barrier in the situation or like the chaos of this third person that's thrown in, it's all and also the way that it's framed by Robbie's cinematography and the fact that they didn't have an excessive lighting kit, and so they're using a lot of found light, and so the blocking for the film, which is crazy, is because of where light was. And so they were
yeah,
finding that in those moments and making the scenes. It's just like unbelievable. One of my favorite scenes is where Roberto's doing the rabbit, and in that scene, that's all improvised. Yeah,
wow,
it's one take, and they shot it, and Roberto is basically just saying everything he has that he can say in English. So like he lists off his two real sisters' names, and like he says like I love my mama, and like all this stuff that like Jim had no idea he was gonna say any of this stuff, and it's like gold. It's so beautiful, this scene, so funny, and I can't believe that it didn't exist on a page.
that's a very good point. When Jim Jarmusch was talking about working with him, he was like, we had a basic outline, but he would just have to kind of let him go. Basically, is what I get.
Yeah.
And the way that he would get performances, I think it's another brilliance of his directing. He said communicating with someone who speaks a different language is actually not that hard. He's like, because you get everything from their facial expressions. To me, though, that's his brilliance.
Yeah.
I think it would be hard because I think he just knows exactly how to tap into what he needs.
Yeah.
And
And he's also, because he's such a collaborative director, like he talks openly about meeting with actors and figuring out what their needs are and how to get those needs met for the
yeah,
basis of the performance rather than being adversarial or being like, you come in and do your job, hit this mark or whatever. He's like, no, like we're gonna make this work. And especially if you're improvising blocking and stuff based on what you have in a scene, it's like you're gonna need actors that are trusting of you to be like, okay, I need you here and you're over here. You got to change this position so that your face is in the light. And if you have the wrong person, like say Sean Connery in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, it's not gonna go well.
I learned so much from him. I didn't realize how much he influenced me also until like this last year. So it was kind of perfect that you and I started chatting about him and Cronenberg, and
Mm-hmm.
I started realizing how much I learned about working with actors and like what you just mentioned, the collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
He taps into who that person is and how it applies to the scene and the character, and it is a total collaboration. He makes everyone in the whole thing comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
and you feel that vibe from his movies. It's so many. Look at the variety of people he has, so many different
Oh,
personalities.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, the variety is amazing. Something when I was first coming across his films, it was during the boom of indie films before like the 90s boom. So like they're very, very independent directors and things. And I thought it was foreign films. I thought he was a foreign film because he had so many different languages in movies and different ethnicities of characters that I just wasn't seeing anywhere else. And so I was just like, oh, yeah, this guy's I'm not sure where he's from, but it's certainly not the States. Like, it just, like, I didn't know, you know? And, like, Stranger Than Paradise was such an interesting thing to watch because it started off, like, I think the first third was a short, and then he and John continued to work it until it was, like, a full feature. And that kind of, like, experimentation and, you know, I just think he's such a interesting film director that I didn't realize like was so in like stitched into my bones from watching these movies so many times. But like we'll get to one of his films that I watched it a
Yeah,
lot, and you forget about those when it's been 20, 30 years or something, and then you put it back
you
on
do.
and you're like, oh my gosh, it's like getting back into your childhood bed or something. You're like, oh yep, this is totally this fits, this is perfect.
Oh, it was so exciting going back over this, like rewatching these movies because I hadn't seen them in a while. And
Hmm.
like you said, what did you say? Jumping into your, yeah, it's like
Yeah,
this cozy space.
it's super cozy. And also, I don't know how you are with music. I love music, and I
Me
love
too.
directors that use music in such a specific way because music can like carry a narrative, it can influence the tone of a moment, do a lot of different things. So when you have directors that understand the power of that, because I heard an interview where Jim said, if your movie has sound, then your movie is 50% image, 50% sound, and that is an important balance. And so I thought that was really, really smart. And in this film, his use of like Tom Waits is like so great. It's so good. And just like his music is so good.
It's cool that you mentioned that because yeah, he said for him, he said music is a large part of my film, but I like it most when it grows out of the film.
Hmm.
I wrote that down because I was like, that's a very good way to describe it.
Yeah.
It seems to organically flow out of the situation and the characters.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just really good. I had another quote from him where, well, it's not a quote, but he basically was talking about how he makes films by creating little pinpoints and then eventually connecting the dots to create a picture. And as since he's also a collage artist, I was like, that's really interesting because I wouldn't think of him that way. But if you go from Stranger Than Paradise to Down by Law, and then we'll go from there, there's specific decisions about what we see and what we don't see in the film. And the jailbreak is like an obvious example of like normally in a jailbreak movie, that's all we're gonna see, and we don't. And it's just so like it's just so clever, like how he sort of plays with this part matters to me, this part not necessarily so much. And so that
This is what I want to see.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's so cool. And that shot when they're running through the sewer
Yes,
and they just are bouncing the light off the water, it's like
it's gorgeous.
it's so good. It's so good. Going through the swamp, I mean there's so many things in
Oh,
this.
that swamp, he shoots it like, yeah, it almost
Yeah.
looks like they're in the middle of a snow landscape
Mhm.
suddenly. It's just because it's so gorgeous the way he shoots it.
Yeah.
I've never seen a swamp look so beautiful. I was like, that is
Yeah.
amazing.
It's gorgeous black and white cinematography. It really is. I'd seen it on VHS when it was kind of not great, but then seeing the transfers now, it's really stunning. It's just gorgeous.
And it's really cool that you mentioned Tom Waits. Yeah, that's like, not only is he perfect in the movie, but his music, it's so fused into it. It seems like he was made
Yeah.
to do a soundtrack for Jarmusch, you know?
Yeah.
They fit hand in glove.
And he keeps working with musicians. Like there's this thing that
Yes.
he continually does throughout his films, and it always, in my opinion, it always works. It always makes sense. It's always interesting. I never am like, but why? Because you see some movies, like say, I don't know, there was like a kung fu movie that had the RZA in it, and I was like, I get it. He's from the Wu-Tang Clan, like that kind of makes sense. But like you see RZA in a Jarmusch film, and it totally fits and makes sense and it's hilarious. And or like in Ghost Dog, I think he's in that too, right?
He is.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's this scene where he greets
Yes.
him on the street.
On the
Yeah.
street. Yeah,
He
yeah,
greets
yeah.
there's RZA and Jizza, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. He makes some really awesome moves. But anything else that you have on Down by Law before we move on?
You know what? It occurred to me, and this is going to be a thread that I'll bring up again. That him and Cronenberg, that they're both very existential filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so exciting to me that it jumped out at me after we had talked, and I was like, there is a connection with these two,
Yeah.
and even though they're very different, right?
Yeah.
And it jumped out at me when I was watching Down by Law. I was like, oh, he's saying so much.
Yeah.
and Roberto Benigni shows up, and the first thing he starts talking about is Walt Whitman.
Yes.
And I'm like, this is okay. Yes, it's right here.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing about Jim. I say the other thing, like there's not going to be others, but there will.
Right.
Is he was like a English major, I believe, before, or literary major, and so in his films there's so many touchstones continuously to authors and to poetry and to these things that like I didn't pick up on when I first watched it when I was in a teenager or whatever. But
Yep.
then now I
Yeah.
rewatch it and I'm like, oh, Chaucer, okay, like I get it. Like
Yeah,
it's
Chaucer.
yeah,
Oh
it's
my God. Yeah. And then he starts talking about Robert Frost, and
yes.
they come to a road where they actually have to choose where to go. I'm like, this is so out of control. I did not catch half of this, you know.
It's so
It,
good.
and he doesn't explain at all what
Mm-mm.
he like, because Roberto Benigni says Walt Whitman and then says the poem in Italian.
Yeah.
So it's like we don't know what he's saying or what, but we're like, wait a second.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's another thing that jumped out. And then he goes to the wall of the jail cell and draws a window.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, whoa, 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 what's going? I was like, how did I not catch all this? Like,
Yeah,
and he was
because
like,
they deliberately had no natural light. There was no windows or no outside. So when you're in that your confined space, you really are confined. That was their intent. So that window piece is like huge.
that was huge. I was like, that says so much about this little situation here, and it made you really feel it. And then, and he says, "Look, do we look out, or is it say looking on?" And I was like, oh, but there's a lot going on there too. I was like, why did I not catch all this last time? And but yeah, but that was the other main thing that I wanted to bring up was just that, yeah, that whole existential thing. I was like, okay, it wasn't just my imagination. He's for sure hitting on some touch points here. It's
Yeah.
touchstone.
Yeah, it's really good. I don't know what else to say about that. Also in 1986, we had another film. David Cronenberg's The Fly arrives. It's a science fiction horror film starring Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis, loosely based on George Langeland's, if I'm saying that right, 1957 short story of the same name, and then 1958 film of the same name. The Fly tells of an eccentric scientist who, after one of his experiments goes wrong, slowly turns into a fly, sort of. What was your introduction to The Fly?
And I think that was like many kids who are getting into horror at that time. And I didn't, of course, know who David Cronenberg was, but I was like, this is a little different than the horror movies I've been watching.
Yeah, it is.
I was like, this isn't Friday the 13th. And, I was like, wait a second. This isn't Nightmare on Elm Street. So I remember being young and watching it and kind of messing my mind up a little bit. I was like, and then I revisited it later as once I started film and studying more about film. And he's another one that I come back to, and his movies always grow with me more. But The
Yeah.
Fly, yeah, I first saw it when I was younger, and it kind of blew my mind that he was doing something very different with horror.
Yes. Oh, completely. Mine was in my dad's video store. It was that VHS box cover of the weird cell thing, with the hand coming out of it. And I loved Jeff Goldblum so much that I had to watch it. And I was a gore kid, so all the gore effects and the creature effects, I just fell in love with Cronenberg. And I was like, I have to see everything. It was the same thing that Jim Jarmusch's film did. I just was like, I'm going to watch everything that this person has done. And so I did. And, one of the things, since we were talking about sound with Down by Law, I think mentioning Howard Shore for the score of this is important because he would work with Cronenberg many, many times. Soundtracks that I would buy, and I was never like a score kid, but there's something about what Howard Shore does that really gets into my bones. Shore also, of course, worked on Scorsese's After Hours, David Fincher's Seven. Like he's done a lot of soundtrack work. But I just love what he does. And also the cinematographer is Mark Irwin, who also did The Brood, Scanners, Videodrome, Dead Zone, and Kingpin. I always like to throw that in there because it's like, wait, what?
His cinematography is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's cool that you mentioned Howard Shore because, yeah, him and Cronenberg, they were both on the indie level together, I believe, in Canada.
Yeah.
Was when they started working together. I heard an interview with them, and it was really cool how they collaborated. Like they're another Jarmusch and Tom Waits, or John Laurie, I should say, too.
Yeah.
The way they work together, it's such an organic part of the movie.
Yeah.
And I remember Cronenberg saying he wanted it to be very operatic.
It works.
And it was. It's an intimate score, but it's also, very, as the stakes get higher, it just swells into like these ridiculous peaks that wouldn't work normally.
Right.
But it works really well.
Yeah, it's one of those go-tos for people when they're like, remakes aren't good, and people go, well, Cronenberg's The Fly, and then people go, okay, well, because people just always talk about these original ideas, which
Yeah.
reminds me of something that Jarmusch said, where he said that he's way more interested in like versions of things rather than original ideas. He likes the idea of a remake or an updating, I would say, of something, but he likes the idea of endless versions of everything rather than like focusing being like this has to be an original thing because so many things come from an influence that it's almost like BS when somebody's like, this has to be original," and you're like, "Well, that also is an echo from this thing over here." But
Yes.
what Cronenberg did with The Fly was took it from the 50s and updated it to the 80s with the gore effects and the things that he can actually show us on screen rather than have it be like, and then the fingernails maybe fell out. He's like, nope, watch it. And you're like, oh God, this is awful. Like, it's just so amazing, so incredible. And his infectious obsession with, now it's called body horror, but the breaking down of the human body and becoming this like insect thing while you're watching the relationship do the exact same sort of decomposition in front of you, it's really moving in a weird way rather than just being this off putting, I don't know, horror show.
Well, you know what? And you hit on something there, because the thing about the fly, what attracted me, even when I was younger, like as a just a kid, I was always connected to movies that focused on relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always stayed that way. If there was a connection that I made with these characters and their relationship with each other, I would just follow it. And I was watching a lot of adult movies very young
Same.
because yeah, I was looking for that something else, something deeper. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what it was. And with The Fly, like I said, it was different than other horror movies. I was like, I really care. I really care about these people. And and I watched it recently. And I'm like, this is a love story. This
Yeah,
is like,
it's a love story.
this is a I was like, this is totally traumatic. And then I went back and heard David Cronenberg say that actually. He was like, yeah, this is actually a very romantic movie, but it's also very, he said when he went back and revisited it, he realized how traumatic it was.
Yeah.
And, but a lot of people have said, I've heard people say he's cold and clinical and, detached. And I don't really get that a lot. His detractors have said that. I've always thought that he was very human,
Yeah.
and that's what connected me to him.
Mm-hmm.
He has a different way of exploring it,
For sure.
the humanity
Yeah.
in us and the connection between us. But The Fly is a very human film. It's got the body horror too, which is a blast. But
Yeah, I mean, it's the layers. It's like what we were saying about Down by Law. It's like if you
yeah,
look at it just at one level, you're like, yes, I'm entertained or I'm horrified and that was a fun thrill ride. That's a film. But if you want to go and get into the murky bits of The Fly, you get that love story and you get, I know, just a lot of the things his later films, I think, really get into these themes. But I just think The Fly, it just blew me away because, like we keep going back to, there was nothing else this year like this, you know? It's like there's sometimes movements of cinema, but like The Fly that year, you look at all those other movies, which is why I'm framing each year with just a little bit of what else was going on. That's very singular.
I liked what you did there, by the way, and it's super cool that I just as a side note, as a like if I were listening as a fan, the time capsule thing, I love this.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. But framing it within the movies that were that, yeah, I'm like, it does put it in perspective. Would you say Top Gun, Crocodile Dundee?
Yeah.
And, I mean, and then
And
even if you look at the
Platoon.
horror, and what was the other one?
Platoon.
Yeah, yeah, it was totally different than anything going on, and it was a mainstream movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like The Fly and The Blob, three great examples of successful remakes. Yeah, they just, I mean, they were big swings for these films, and not all of them paid off, but this one definitely, found an audience. It wasn't in the top three of the year, but for what it is, it did well.
It's another thing too. When I got a hold of this little existential thread, I was like, oh, it's all over The Fly.
Yeah,
And I mean,
yeah,
like about like our place in the universe, and also he said that when he read the script, he had never read a script that had so many things about him in it,
mm.
and that he felt it was very autobiographical. And I feel like a lot of his films are.
Yeah. There's a lot of
Yeah,
films where the lead is David Cronenberg.
Yeah. And I was like, he's just so funny when he says stuff so matter of factly,
Hmm.
And I mean, he was like, it was very, and you're watching the movie as Jeff Goldblum just disintegrates and things.
Yeah.
But I could see it as an artist journey, as a creator, because Seth Brundle, he wants to do something significant that will actually make an impact in society. He said, when he tells Gina Davis, she said, I have a lot of interviews tonight with that person. And he's like, yeah, but they're not going to change the world as we know it.
Hmm.
He sincerely wants to make a mark. And it's not purely ego driven. I think he really just wants to do something special. And it's a very good setup for an artist journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Anything else to close out The Fly?
No, you know what? It was just that existential thread that I caught going through there. And he talks about changing into something else and making an evolution. That's another thing that I was like, okay, that I'm catching something else there. I mean, we could go on, I'm sure, a couple of different tributaries here, but it starts dealing with obsession and the
Hmm.
darker side of the artistic process. And Cronenberg had mentioned about Crash. He said of that film, it's an existential romance.
Yeah.
And I just had written that down too when I was writing about The Fly. I'm like, Cronenberg, you are amazing. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it's really just a romantic movie. And I was like, yeah, it's true, that and The Fly. But yeah, that's all. I think it's just completely insane, like you said, that this was at the mainstream,
Yeah. In the mainstream cinema. First run.
the movie
Okay.
going public. This was sandwiched in there.
Yeah. It's wild. All right, so moving on to 1987, the top three films are Three Men and a Baby, Fatal Attraction, and Beverly Hills Cop 2. The top of the charts is The Bangles' Walk Like an Egyptian, Hearts Alone, and Greg Abbott's Shake You Down. I had to look that one up because there aren't really enough R&B songs about singers claiming to be telepathic. Sadly, this year there was no movies by Jarmusch or Cronenberg. So, moving on to 88. The top three films of 88 were Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Coming to America, and Good Morning Vietnam. On the Billboard charts, we had George Michael's Faith, In Excess, Need You Tonight, and George Harrison's Got My Mind Set on You, which would have been a great theme for Scanners, now that I think about it. The same year, David Cronenberg gives us Dead Ringers, released the same day as Gorillas in the Mist. So take that, Barbie and Oppenheimer. This has been happening for a long time. Uh,
This, I love that.
the synopsis is twin gynecologists take full advantage of the fact that nobody can tell them apart until their relationship begins to deteriorate over a woman. It stars Jeremy Irons and Genevieve Bujold. Cronenberg also plays an obstetrician in the film, which I just wanted to mention that. What's your history with Dead Ringers?
Oh man, so I came to this later. This was one of those ones that I had just kept putting off for a long time. Not on purpose. You know how you save, like, you have a favorite director and you'll kind of put a couple of one or two of their movies aside so you'll have something.
Mm-hmm.
And I did, and when I was like, I had seen the bulk of his work, and so this was right around. And again, I had just started writing screenplays, really getting into writing screenplays, and I was blown away by this. I first of all, I thought, why did I wait so long to watch this?
Yeah,
I had just hit 30, and for some reason, I was being very philosophical and
sure. That happens with age.
ponderous because I was 30. So I remember that pretty distinctly. And I was like, okay, this is amazing. I can't believe it's right there with everything he did. And I thought, for some reason, I don't know why, I thought it was going to be just a drama.
Nope.
I
No.
was like, oh, this is Cronenberg's drama. No, this is
Wow.
not a straight. It's not a straight. What about you?
So we had this in the video store, and I looked at the box art, and the back had the costumes that Denise Cronenberg designed, the red surgical outfits, and I was like, well, I'm gonna put this on, and I was blown away by it. It's one of my favorite movies, which people always laugh at because it's a movie of what it is, and but it's just, for me, it's the descent into madness, the way that the drug addiction corrupts his brain until he starts seeing mutated vaginas, and then he has to design tools to work on mutated women. It's so bizarre and yet believable. Jeremy Irons' portrayal of the two doctors is so subtle and full of just incredibly minute differences between the two. The fact that they didn't have CGI at the time and had to I mean, it's just so much work for an actor. At this time when I saw it, I was very into acting. I was very into watching performances and seeing the choices the actors were making and learning what character actors were and that they could be like Brad Pitt. He's like a character actor, but he's pretty, so he gets leading roles. But like you watch his choices that he makes, they're like
Yeah.
interesting choices, which is what character actors usually are responsible for. And yeah, this performance, it just blew me away. I actually took the tape and so it was never in the shop anymore. And I would just watch it, and I've said it before, so I'll skip over the story where I made somebody that I was in a relationship cry by showing them this movie. But um, I just think it's so just wonderfully powerful. I love just the metal stuff that they create, the actual tools, the costuming. Same thing like we were talking about with Wim Wenders or Jarmusch's films. He takes time. And it's the time that he takes that gets this film under your skin. So when, like, there's certain Cronenberg movies that when they end, you're just sort of like, ooh, like you want to shake it off. You want to go on a walk. You want to take a shower. You're like, this wonderful cinematic theme has like crept into my body, and now I need to get it out because the movie's over. But like, it's so effectively done that it, you're saturated in it by the end. And I think this movie does that so well, and it's sort of weird that I feel comfortable in it, but I just think it's just fascinating, and it's just so like when I think of Cronenberg, this is what I think of. I think of like the Dead Ringers run up to some of the other films that we'll talk about, and it's just my absolute favorite period of his career, even though he's had huger success after that. But for me, Dead Ringers is like the best.
I can see why it's one of your just absolute favorites. There's everything Cronenberg in here.
Mm-hmm.
When he starts really losing his grasp of
Yeah.
reality, yeah, and the thing that he has the mastery of starts unraveling, and
Yep.
yeah, it goes to that art dealer to make the metallic tools.
So
He's
cool.
like, "This is for operating on women with mutant vaginas." Is that what he says?
Yeah.
Yeah, with mutant vaginas, and I remember just losing my mind. I was like, this movie is insane. I
Mm-hmm.
love this. What you mentioned too, I want to put a point on that he's one of the only directors, and why I fell in love with him so much was that he always makes me uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
first. Like when I'm watching his films, I'm usually never comfortable,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but in a really wonderful way.
Well, I think
Like,
what he does really well is the same thing, kind of like Jim's films, which is an interesting way that we're coupling them, is that they're in the driver's seat. I don't feel like they're taking me on a weird way. I feel like I don't know where we're going, but I don't feel like it's a wasted trip. I'm not like questioning why I'm in the seat, but I'm nervous because I don't know the destination.
that's actually a really good way to say that. And I think that a lot of that is that they go so much by, well, Jarmusch especially by instinct, and
Mm-hmm.
they're on their own journey.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another link between them, which I found fascinating, is they approach their films that way.
Yeah.
Cronenberg said of Crash that he didn't know why he was going to make the movie until he made it.
Yeah.
He's like the process of exploring it, and he didn't know why he was making it. It was a journey, and like really a journey for him. And
Yeah.
he said that that's his experience making films. And I think we feel that while we're going with them,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that there is this journey of discovery, and that we're in good hands, but that they're also working through some things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Cronenberg, Cronenberg especially is
Yeah.
working through something.
Seeing Crash, I saw it in the theater, and on opening night, I couldn't have waited at all, but I waited for the last screening, and it was the craziest feeling walking out of that theater into the dark, like night air, getting into a car, and then it driving. I was like, we're all gonna die. Like, it's just like, we're going to crash. Like, it was in, I couldn't get the movie out. It was just like, that kind of viewing is so magical and rare that like when you walk out of something and it's just changed you, not forever but in that moment, and it's gonna like ebb off, and by the time you wake up tomorrow you'll be normal again, but like you're probably gonna need to talk about it a little bit before bed, that kind of thing. I love that. We're not talking about Crash, but man,
No, but
it's just I
it
can't.
does apply to everything he did. That and Dead Ringers, he said the reason he makes films also is to explore something he doesn't have the answers to. I mean, when you look at Dead Ringers, bringing this back to that, it opens right away with those twins when they're younger, right? And they have they look like mini Cronenbergs.
Right.
They've got the glasses, the same kind of, hair. And then, and they're talking about women and sex and really trying to figure this out. They're working through it already as little kids and wanting to experiment. They go up to the little girl and ask her, can they experiment on her? Very scientifically.
Yeah.
Like, can we experiment? And you want to have sex with us in the water so we can experiment and see what sex is like in the water? I'm like, this is the opening scene.
Yeah. Get ready, everybody.
I'm like, that's amazing. And it really set the tone for the whole thing because they're, in a way, they're artists trying to figure out the one thing. They're trying to figure out women, really. The body. They're approaching it from the body, but there's a lot going on there too. They become these master, twin gynecologists, but they still have no understanding of humanity or women. But they do, they're approaching it from a scientific and the level of, what does he say? It's a shame they don't have a beauty pageant for the insides of a body.
Yeah, I love that line. That's so good.
And to them, they are approaching it artistically and, until he starts unraveling, but their intention is pure. It's just a very strange way to look at it. I mean, for us, it's a very odd. So I really like Cronenberg's whole approach to that. He approaches it in a very sincere way. And like you said, where you feel uncomfortable, you almost need to shake it off.
Yeah.
That's one of those movies that it puts you in that place.
It does. I love it. That's all.
Yeah. And I got to say, watching it again, as much as we're talking about Cronenberg, Jeremy Irons, since you mentioned just what a performance, I was so doubly blown away by him this time. This rewatch, that's the best performance of twins in a movie.
Oh,
by an actor,
hands down. Yeah, and it's one of those, like, this should have been a nominated performance. Like, there's no, come on, outside of being afraid of the subject matter or the genre. If you were literally looking at, and I have this bone to pick all the time with, like, genre films, this performance deserves any accolades that we're sharing for those performances that year. It's really impressive, ×2.
I literally forgot that was the same actor.
Yeah.
Of course I know it's Jeremy Irons. But for me to come at that from as much as I know about that film and about Jeremy Irons, and it really, I just was like, these are two separate people. You're right. That was a hands down winner for Oscar.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And they're like,
when he starts breaking down as Beverly, I was like kind of a mess this time.
Yeah.
Because he's nothing without, he's the weaker one.
Yeah, it's Siamese twins is this thing he's playing off of. Yeah, it's just...
Yes, he needs to have his brother. But then you see Elliot's not as strong as he thought either. They have to have each other to experience what they're experiencing. Yeah, they have to experience what the other one's experiencing. And that was my most powerful rewatch, I think, this time. That and Down by Law both jumped out as far as things I had missed a lot, because I hadn't seen Dead Ringers in so long. So that was really exciting.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great rewatch. In my opinion, other people don't like it, but I get it.
Yeah, I was a mess, kind of. I was like, man, I didn't expect this to be so dramatic this time.
And now, it's 1989, the 80s death rattle, the drive to the theater, you could hear Bobby Brown's My Prerogative, Chicago's Look Away, and Poison's Every Rose Has Its Thorns. The top 3 films of 1989 are Batman, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and Lethal Weapon 2. Huge studio tentpoles even then. Then we also get Jim Jarmusch's Mystery Train. So, okay. Fits right in with everything else. Mystery Train synopsis. 3 stories are connected by a Memphis hotel in the spirit of Elvis Presley, written and directed by Jim. Stars Matsatoshi Nagawa from My Sons, Patterson, and Just Remembering, Yuki Kudo from Memoirs of a Geisha and Rush Hour 3, and Screamin' Jay Hawkins, of course. He's super fantastic at it. There's also Tom Noonan, Cy Richardson, Steve Buscemi, Tom Waits, Joe Strummer, again, our cinematographer, Robbie Mueller. Love it. What was your first experience with Mystery Train?
This is one that I rented. It was like a Hollywood Video at the time. And I was on my Jarmusch kick. And I hadn't seen this. This was another one that I hadn't seen. He had already become one of my favorite directors. You know what? I was like, I need to own this. Like right away. I was like, I think this became one of my favorite movies quickly. I think of his movies, this had the most rewatchability for me.
Yeah, same.
Same? Oh, that's cool. It became one of my comfort movies. Like, just
Yeah.
I think it was the perfect blend. And so that's what immediately I was like, this is the perfect, everything just came together so perfectly.
Yeah, this was my first. So this is the film that I watched and then went backwards from.
Oh, this is the one. Okay. This is
Yeah,
okay.
this is the
Perfect. Yeah.
one, and I absolutely loved it. It's one of the movies that my wife and I first bonded over when we first met. It was this and Peter Greenaway's films. I don't know if you're a Peter Greenaway fan, but Belly of an Architect and like there's so many. Drowning by Numbers was the big one. We used to watch it all the time. Anyway, Mystery Train, I watched it and I was just like, this is what I was talking about when I was like, is this a foreign film director? Because like the way that he's doing this, it just felt from somewhere else. It didn't feel like it was from here. And the way that the female characters are portrayed is very respectful. The way that there's three stories that are all happening simultaneously, but you're not hit over the head with it. It's all
Yes.
like where things are interconnecting and linking. You're like, oh, oh, okay, that's this person, and they're going there, and it's each little vignette section like is it has its own sort of story and everything, but it's also like a connective piece. So you couldn't like take away parts and have this thing like hold together. And the moments in the hotel are some of my favorite things. Like Screaming Jay
Yeah.
Hawkins, it's so good and it's so funny. The humor in the film, I think, all really works. And it's one of those films that is almost timeless in a way. Like it's just it's its own thing. I don't know. You can't tell it's 1989 because parts of it feel like in the 50s or something. And so the way that this is all put together, it's such a unique film that I absolutely love Mystery Train.
It is very unique. That's a good point too. Is that's a little bubble, like a little time capsule, in a lot of the same way that Lynch is like Blue Velvet. It has that we don't really know what time period this is type
Mm-hmm.
of thing. I thought it really took his theme of sort of the outsider, the alien, and really expanded on that
Mm-hmm.
because he started that like with Stranger Than Paradise. You know, the she's coming from Budapest to visit her cousin, so we're seeing New York through the eyes of a foreigner,
Yeah.
and so this took that concept that's been running through his films and really I thought blew it up. Like everyone is kind of looking at this from a different point of view. We're seeing this world through the eyes of an outsider, an outside observer,
Yeah,
and
I think that is something that pops up a lot in his work, and it's something that I think you could see anchored back to. I know that he loves Buster Keaton's films, and Buster Keaton is one of those people that, like, as opposed to what's Charlie Chaplin. I was like, what's the other famous silent film? So the difference there between Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin is like Buster Keaton is this person who the world is happening to, and he's like
yes,
this outsider, and the way that he's even framed in his own films, he's like smaller and the world is bigger. It's like this very isolated thing. And I know that his love for that went even further, but like you can see that sort of outsider displaced being in a lot of his films, and that's one of the threads that I think that like resonated with me a lot, is feeling like I didn't belong wherever I was, and I was like, now I can see these people in it. And his films aren't interested in torturing the outsiders like most films where they're just like, this person's different so we're going to beat him up, and then there'll be like a scene at the end where it's okay. Like this doesn't happen. Like you watch this couple and the guy's not even really talking, he's just doing cool like cigarette lighting tricks and stuff, and it's just like I don't know
Carl
anyone that
Perkins.
yeah, I don't know anyone that watched this movie and wasn't like, I need to get a Zippo and start practicing like right away. Like it's just that's what happens from Mystery Train.
Yeah, and I need to listen to some Carl Perkins.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And again, great use of music in this film. It's just it has like that certain vibe. It's where his films I think really start to have this vibe from the music that I just go, I don't own a lot of soundtracks, but I gotta get this one. I mean, even in Down by Law, there was a song called Jockstrap Full of Whiskey, I think, by Tom Waits, that I was like, I wrote the lyrics down when I was watching the film on my hand because I was like, I don't know what this music is, but I have to figure it out. And it was a Tom Waits song, of course, but like,
I think that was the opening song, I
oh,
want
is
to
it?
say.
Yeah, his films
I
just
think,
have that way of like being like, here's something cool, and you're like, what is this band or what is this thing? That
yeah,
his
they do. You're right.
yeah, and Mystery Train's just like so great. I mean, the I'm just talking about one segment, but like where they go to the recording studio, and the lady's giving the tour,
Oh,
and she's talking so fast, and they're just
so fast.
staring at her like they don't understand a word that she's saying. It's just so great.
That's one of my family. This has became like a family watch
Oh,
for
I
me
love
too.
that.
Yeah, my sister and I, and my mom, and we were like, well, hey, let's watch Mystery Train, and we would die laughing at that scene too. That's like when she just starts rattling off all this. It was so funny. The couple, that Japanese couple,
Yeah,
they're so good, so
so good.
charming.
Yeah.
She's adorable. Well, she's adorable for one thing, and he's hilarious. But they don't, like you said, they don't say much. It's it's how they're interacting and how with the landscape. It's so
Yeah,
great.
it's good. And I think it's the first film I noticed Steve Buscemi in. It's one of the first times I saw him and was like, this guy looks cool. What's his story? Like, I wonder if he's in other things, this pre-internet. So you just didn't know back then.
Yeah, you had to actually hunt and research
Yeah,
things. Like
yeah,
you, wait a second, who is this guy? Yeah, you're right. I think that that might have been the first time I took notice of him too, because he was just starting to pop up in a lot of stuff.
yeah.
Another thing that stood out to me with this was, like I said, these are all threads that he has. That outsider thing, for one thing, I kind of, as I was writing this down, I wrote down that outsider, the word outsider,
Hmm.
because it applies to him and Cronenberg both.
Yeah.
These are all outsiders. These are people that are, on the fringes of society that are different. And there's two things. Well, one thing, his characters aren't trying to be cooler than you,
Hmm.
or they're not trying to be too cool. They're not trying to be better. They just are kind of cool.
Right. Yeah.
It's like they're not trying. They just are cool. Like they're and you just want to hang out with them.
Hmm.
Like, and they are, like you said, they're the celebration of outsiders. And he's saying they're cool because they're their self,
Yeah.
and they're doing their own trend, their own thing. And
Yeah. He also is a director who I constantly feel like he's measuring the difference between myth versus reality. Because it's like,
mhm.
the myth of the crazy jailbreak, where it's like, well, I made a jailbreak movie and that's not even really part of like, it's just like the reality
Yes.
of it is these guys and spending time with them, and this is what the situation is. In this one, they travel all the way from Japan to Graceland to go to this recording studio, and then the moment is just this. Like, it's just like, it's
Uh-huh.
not, it's just, I feel like he's constantly doing this thing in his films where it's just the thing that people would bounce off of it is the reality that he's showing you. He's like, the time that you're sitting in a room with somebody, he's like, I'm not going to cut away from this scene. Like, I'm going to let you sit here while these two characters have nothing happening between them, and then he'll smack the counter with the fly swatter. Like, it's just like, and it just works so well. It's like his manipulation of time, same thing.
I really like what you said there. The myth versus, like, what he's setting up versus what really happens.
Hmm.
He plays at that a lot. You're right. He does that with genre too.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, the jailbreak movie,
Hmm.
the Ghost Dog, the samurai
Yeah.
gangster movie,
Yep. Zombies.
um, zombies,
Vampires.
vampires. He plays with genre a lot.
Hmm.
Like you said, he sets up certain things and then he'll go this other way.
Hmm.
He's like, oh yeah, but I really just wanted you to hang out with these people, like you're saying. Like, and I love that.
Me too.
Like, you have me. That excites me.
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
don't think he's gimmicky with it, is the thing.
No, not at all. Yeah.
No, it's like there's a point to everything. And what's the zombie one?
Oh god, we
I always think of Every Lover Left Alive, and I'm like, no, that's not the.
only lovers left alive is
That's
the
a.
vampire one.
Yeah.
The zombie one though was really good. I was surprised that people didn't respond as much as
Well, because they're expecting Zombieland or they're expecting Shaun of the Dead, and what he gives you is a story where he's like, "Are we really treating each other right? And are we abusing the earth?" And you're like, "Oh God, wow! I didn't really know this is what we were doing."
we're like, well, wait a second.
Hmm.
Well, with only lovers left alive too, he did something totally different. It's a vampire movie, but is it really? Is it more a meditation on musicians
Hmm.
and a relationship that's been going on a long time? Like, you can apply this to anything.
Hmm. Yeah.
The Mystery Train really, I think, established his propensity for mixing different genres and tones.
Yep.
Mixing tones, because there's there's a little bit of tension, there's comedy, there's a little drama, and there's a little, also, like, a little weird sort of like did the ghost of Elvis show up?
Yeah, they put it
And
in the
Tom,
trailer. That's like my favorite thing is that they're
I'm
like,
like,
okay,
only Jim Jarmusch,
yeah,
right? The dead don't die.
that's
There we go.
right. There it is.
Yeah. But I think Mystery Train was the first time that he really combined all of these different elements, these different tones and genres. And yeah, the Ghost of Elvis was hilarious. I'm like, only Jarmusch would throw that in,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah,
It comes floating in the room while Blue Moon's playing, and you're like, he hangs out there
yeah,
minutes, you
yeah. It
know?
does. Yeah, so
And
weird.
she's like trying to wake the girl up. And
Yeah, she's
it's
like, "What are you doing here?" He's like, "I don't really know." It's like, oh,
that
all right, which is like him playing with the myth of like a ghost and the reality of like it just being like kind of like whatever. Like he's like there, and then you're just like, uh, okay,
that actually puts a pin on your point there of the myth versus the reality.
yeah,
Yeah, because they're talking about Elvis, and we're wondering what he's going to do with this because it's going to come up again, and we know it's going to come up again, and that's how he do it. He just has him float on in there.
yeah.
I'm just hanging out.
This is what it would be like, and you're just like, oh, okay, well, not as exciting as I thought it would be, and
And then
like,
you have
go ahead.
yeah, it's Tom Noonan showing up, telling the story about his comb,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and what does he say? He's like, he's, didn't he say that a man came and told him with the story of the comb that he tells you?
Yeah, yeah.
Roberto Benigni's wife, I believe, is the actress in that, and but it's hilarious. It's just random. It's the whole building on the myth and the storytelling.
Yeah, and he just I believe that's another example of him writing for a character, writing for a person, because that's another thing that Jim does a lot is he will write specifically for specific actors. And
Yes,
then that's how he's acquired this troupe is that they now know that they have this super cool person who's just like writing bits for them and they're like he knows what I do, so I'll show up and I'll just do that, you know? And The Dead Don't Die was like all that. He just was like he wrote it for Bill, Chloe Sevigny, and the Patterson guy. I forget his name.
oh man, Patterson too. Man, this is so exciting. Just because now I want to watch The Dead Don't Die again for one thing.
Yes,
And
that's the thing.
yeah,
Once we started revisiting stuff, I was like, man, I'm just gonna watch them all again. Why not?
yeah. I'm like, and Patterson, blew me away.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely gonna go do The Dead Don't Die again. And I like the point you made about him writing for actors. That's what struck me also about him was when, like I said, I learned a lot about filmmaking and writing and about from him just in his interviews and stuff. And I was like, that's a really cool idea he would meet these people and like Isaac the Bunkele,
Yeah.
and they're different people from different parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
He would start writing a part for them because he wanted to work with them. I was
Yeah.
like, that sounds simple, but that's a really creative way to do it. And
Well, it makes sense for a filmmaker who loves film. Like he is so stoked to have the Criterion channel and to watch all these films that he would see things and not think like, well, I can't work with that actor because they only speak Italian or they only speak Japanese or whatever. He'd just be like, I love that actor. I want to work with that person, and then just put them in his his movie. And like no other American director is doing that and not calling attention to like either the ethnicity of the character or like that's never what he does. He's never like this is the token character of this color. Like there's no racial, it's just like not something that he does. He pulls humans to be in his films and it just seems inconsequential like their race or anything. It's fascinating. I think it's so exciting. It's what blew me away by Mystery Train was just the diversity of characters and, like I said, the fact that not all great directors treat women very well in their scripts and things and give them something to work with, and he does a lot. So I just think that that's worth pointing out. Any other final thoughts before we move on from Mystery Train?
that is excellent too. He does actually, to piggyback on that, he does create really strong roles for women and doesn't beat you over the head with it.
Right.
They're just strong people and good characters.
Yeah. It's
And
I won't name directors that don't do that, but it's not hard to find people. But
that's actually, yeah, that's a very big thing of mine too. My little indie, it's 3 female characters,
there you
and
go.
I love writing female characters, and so
Yeah.
I'm attracted to directors that do that.
Yeah.
And you're right, there are some that I won't name that it's very obvious that
Yeah, you're like, do you know ladies at all? Like, it's just like,
You've met women before?
ever? I mean, okay. Like, I'll be watching something with my wife, and she'll just be like, what is this guy's deal? And I'm like, yeah, this is real
What?
weird. I don't know. And imagine if it was the other way. Like, if you, I don't think that there's a single female director that's written something that's been, a guy enters the scene, and you're like, well, that's not right. Like, it just, it's only this way. It's very bizarre. But
Yeah, I just wanted to, yeah, to go ahead and just reiterate what you just said there, because the way he does it is actually really cool, because he doesn't make a point of it. He
no.
just, these are just strong characters.
Yeah, yeah, it's great. Moving on, it is 1990. The top three songs are Wilson Phillips' Hold On, Roxette's It Must Be Love, and Sinead O'Connor's Nothing Compares to You. The box office is dominated by Ghost, Pretty Woman, and Home Alone, but sadly nothing from either of our two directors, which brings us to 1991. The top three songs are Bryan Adams' Everything I Do It For You, so you already know what one of the top three movies are. Color Me Bad's I Wanna Sex You Up, and CNC Music Factory's Gonna Make You Sweat / Everybody Dance Now. The box office is ruled by Terminator 2, Robin Hood Prince of Thieves, and still Home Alone. That people forget what a juggernaut Home Alone was, that it could open the year before and be in the top three the next year of all the movies that came out. It's pretty crazy. But Jim Jarmusch being, having his thumb right on the pulse brings us Night on Earth. The cinematographer this time is Frederick Elms. People know from Eraserhead, Valley Girl, Wild at Heart. It's super awesome cinematographer. Of course, Jim Jarmusch knows what he's doing. The cast is crazy big. Some of the players are Winona Ryder, Gina Rowlands, Giancarlo Esposito, Armin Mueller-Stahl, Rosie Perez. That's just the New York section. Then in Paris, we have Isaac de Bankel, Beatrice Dahl, Emile Labroso, Pascal Nunzoni. In Rome, we have the return of Roberto Benigni, Paolo Bonicelli. In Helsinki, we have Mari Palompa and Kari Vananen and Sakari Kusaman and Tommy Samala as the passengers. What is your history with Night on Earth?
So yeah, I was definitely obsessed with Jarmusch at this point. It's another one that I had rented, and I was also really obsessed with John Cassavetes at this time.
Yeah, perfect.
As you should be.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh wait, so we have Gina Rowlands. Oh, I'm a huge Winona Ryder fan. I still love her, and
same. Yeah, she's the greatest.
Amazing. Yeah, and doesn't get enough props. I was very excited. Just the fact that the two of them were together in a story in a Jim Jarmusch movie that I had not seen. So
well, because they're like, Jim is so cool. Like, that's the word that's always used when discussing Jim Jarmusch, because he's just cool. He's always been cool. If someone says name someone that's cool, I would picture Jim Jarmusch. It's just the way it is. And Winona Ryder was always cool, from like Heathers and everything. You'd see her and you're just like, that's the coolest person I think I've ever seen. Beetlejuice, everything. She's just like, she's cool. Like, you could try to make her not cool in a movie, but I would be like, she's still cool. Like, it just wouldn't work. And in this movie, she's going to be cool because he's written this thing for her. And sure enough, the section pops up and she's so cool. It's just like, I love it. I don't know. She's so good.
I wish I had seen this at the movies, because I do remember it playing and me being curious, but I wasn't familiar with his name at this time,
Yeah.
And I remember I was like, oh, that's that movie, because I grew up in Austin, Texas, and we had all the little art house. These movies would play at like theaters, and and I remember it popping up. But yeah, so I came to it later. Where I watched it, and I was again blown away by the way he used all of these different actors and all of these different stories, the same way he did Mystery Train.
Yeah.
In a different way. But I was amazed at how smooth. That's what stuck out to me the most about this, was just how smooth he was weaving all of these stories together that seemingly had nothing to do with each other.
Yeah, yeah. And he said that this is one of like two movies, this and Coffee and Cigarettes, where he wanted to make whole movies about things you wouldn't see in movies. Like, this is all the stuff that wouldn't be in a movie. It would be cut out. It'd be on the cutting room floor, and he wants to show that in a movie. So he has 5 interlacing tales, subtly so, I guess. They're taking place at the same time, of stuff that's just, it's got its own pace. It's got its own life. When I watched it, I was like, what is this? Like, what is happening? I couldn't make heads or tails of it, but I was enjoying it. It's something that I had to rewatch. It's like one of those first movies that I remember that wasn't traumatizing, where I was like, I have to rewatch this again, like to know what he's doing, because I believe in the intent of the person creating it. So I don't think that my time is not wasted. I keep saying that, but I just don't feel like he does that. And it's deliberate. And so I would be like, well, but what are we doing? And it's like, okay, we're hanging out with the characters. Oh, we're getting to know them through actual time, as rather than just be like, this person does this thing. And it's just like, oh, okay, this has been happening through all his other movies. And then you start to see, like, as you look back on things, you're like, oh, he's been doing these moves, but in different ways. And it's like, this flourish is hitting me a different way than before. But yeah, I think Night on Earth is really an interesting film of his that I didn't enjoy at first, I would say, but as I sat with it longer, the more I
Mhm.
watched it, the more I was like, oh, beyond specific moments that I always, little funny parts, then I start to get like all of the connections and relationships and things that he's showing, like just the opening part with Winona and who's the woman?
Gina Rollins.
Yeah, where
Yeah.
they both said shit at the same time, and then
Yeah. And
she,
it shows him at the airport.
yeah,
Like, yeah, it's
it's such a
that.
good shot.
And I don't want to sound boring and say that's my favorite of all the little vignettes,
Hmm.
but it is.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah,
It's, I think, just so perfect and beautiful. And yeah, the way he shows them separately. And then, like you said, they both meet
yeah,
kind of like, yeah, saying shit at the same two completely different worlds.
yep, yeah.
And it really illustrates his viewpoint well, that story, through two women,
Hmm.
which I love.
Yeah,
Again,
exactly.
and that was like the first movie she had made after John Cassavetes, her husband, died. And I thought, how cool
Yeah.
that she chose Jim Jarmusch.
Hmm.
And you get so much in those scenes between her and Winona Ryder. And you find out that Winona, she's a casting agent.
Yeah.
She starts seeing this natural talent, Winona Ryder, who's I just want to be a mechanic.
Yeah. She goes, I don't always
She's
want
like,
to be a cab driver. And she's like, what do you want to be? And she goes, a mechanic.
a mechanic. She's this little girl who's sitting on a phone book so she can drive.
Oh, so
And
good.
so, yeah, that's her goal, and she's totally great with it. And she starts asking, and she's like, why, start seeing a natural talent in her. I don't know about all that. She's like, as far as like, auditioning for
Hmm.
her movie. And it's like, that kind of messed up my life,
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to. She's like, you do understand that I'm offering you a role in a movie, I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, but I guess that's good for other people. I was
So
like, that
good.
is amazingly Jarmusch
Yeah.
because there's a sincerity there. She likes what she's doing.
Yeah. It's a prime example of a lesser filmmaker might not be able to have that not just be a dig on Hollywood in some way, you know? Like
Right.
she's just choosing to do what she wants to do. It's not going to be this huge commentary moment, and you can I don't know. I appreciate him so much in his decisions.
He doesn't make a point of it.
Yeah.
He's making his little statements, but he just leaves it out there. He's being himself.
Yeah.
But that scene sets up, man, it says so much about his filmmaking. I mean, that little vignette,
Mhm.
it says so much about his attitude, his viewpoint on filmmaking, on being an artist in society.
Mhm.
Like, he is Winona Ryder. I
Right.
totally believe that's him. I'm just doing what I want to do. And he said, I like books, I like music.
Mhm.
He happens to be doing movies, but he doesn't.
He likes all the other stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
he's not buying into.
he's done albums, he's done books, he's done, art shows. He has all these other interests and he makes movies.
It's a thing he does that's part of his universe.
And he also doesn't, I think, live on a pedestal. I don't think that he puts himself above anything because he makes movies. It's
That's what
like,
I'm getting at. Yeah,
yeah, he is, like you said, Winona Ryder in that scene. He's like, I'm just a person. I'm a mechanic. This is the things that I do with my
yeah,
hands. It just happens to be in the entertainment industry. But, like,
yeah.
he's not like walking around like, look at me. It's like, we are looking because you're super cool and that's weird that you're so cool. But, like, he doesn't think that.
And I think that comes back to what I was saying about his characters. You don't think they're trying to be cool; they just are.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's because it's him.
Yep.
He's not trying to be cool. He just, like you said, he has got to be the coolest person on.
It's ridiculous. And I'll forget it and then I'll watch an interview and I'll be like, oh, that's right.
It's Jim Jarmusch.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Any final thoughts on this before we move on to the final film?
The rewatch of this actually was really fun. I will agree with you that it's a challenging one as far as his catalog goes, because your first couple times you see it, you're trying to get into a flow of what it is.
Yeah, it's a pace
And
that you're.
uh-huh.
And I think part of that, sorry to interrupt, but is that
Oh, go ahead.
he was shooting it all in cars. And I
Oh,
think that was he thought it was going to be easy. I guess it turned to be super, super hard and difficult. But there's something about that I don't know if it's confining or there's just something I bounced around in with that I was thinking about. I mean, you're going from point A to point B. It seems like it should totally just be an easy thing to ride along with, but I don't know. There's something where I got lost in the trip, in the journey. But now I can sit back and relax. But at first I was like, what am I missing something? What is the thing, you know?
no, and I think it's one that I've still kind of whittled away at, even though I was blown away by the stories individual, like by the first, Winona and Gina Rollins,
Mm-hmm.
and then Roberto Benigni.
I mean, he's always great.
Benigni just he comes in and steals the show.
Yep.
He's driving the bishop around and telling stories about his his sexual escapades in his strange
Mm-hmm.
sexual escapades. The most bizarre stories you've heard. The guy's like having a heart attack in the back. It's again, he's playing with tones a lot with this.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because he goes straight to drama after that.
Mm-hmm.
The Helsinki one actually takes you into a dark, this guy, losing his child, and he does it flawlessly. But that was a really good rewatch for me. I'd say that I would recommend that as far as a challenge, as a challenging film, something that if you want to dig into it, something to dig into.
Well, because it's like one night. If you look at the title, "Night on Earth," like it's one night. So you have joy, you have sadness, you have all of these things are happening at the same time on the planet, of course. But is that the point he's making? I don't know, but like it's interesting.
It is one of the ones where I don't really get the point, but in a way, the point is that these things are all in sync and happening at the same time, and it's what connects us is the human level there, the humanity of it, and I think it's cool that he doesn't necessarily make a point of it. He leaves it for you to kind of dig into.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you got this bizarre Tom Waits, bizarre in the best way.
Yes.
The Tom Waits music just floating in and out, like it's just like you're in a weird kind of dream.
Mm-hmm.
Here comes Tom Waits as you float onto another part of the world.
Yes. Yeah.
He's your conductor.
Right. Oh man.
His little DJ bits too. Jarmusch uses him almost like some sort of Greek chorus.
Yeah.
Because he has the little DJ bits in Mystery Train, which is could be a throwback to his character in Down by Law, who's a DJ.
He's got such a great voice. I think it's his voice he likes so much. The gravelly. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got that like. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a great rewatch. It surprised me. Didn't surprise me that I liked it as much as I did, but it was cool. I hadn't seen it in a long time.
Yeah. Well, another movie came out this year, and that film is David Cronenberg's Naked Lunch. Just talk about having your pulse on what everyone's into. It's a film after developing an addiction to the substance he uses to kill bugs. An exterminator accidentally kills his wife and becomes involved in a secret government plot orchestrated by giant bugs in a port town in North Africa. Whew. Okay, it stars Peter Weller, Judy Davis, Ian Holm, and Julian Sands. Oh, R.I.P. Julian Sands. He sadly died this year. Our cinematographer is Peter Shujitsky, who did Empire Strikes Back, Kroll, Rocky Horror Picture Show, just to name a few in the variety of this canon of this cinematographer. The music is of note for sure. We have Howard Shore for tone, and Ornate Coleman, an American jazz improvisational performer, who really goes to town on this score, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. What is your history with David Cronenberg's Naked Lunch?
So, oh man, I'm going to have to condense some things with this one because I have so much to unpack here. First of all, this is my favorite Cronenberg movie. And I saw it at the Dolby Theater, I remember in Austin, where I was growing up. My friend and I went to see it. We were really into David Lynch at that time, the surreal movie. So it was just hit me right at that sweet spot, I still didn't know the name David Cronenberg. I had seen The Fly. I didn't connect his films. And I was like, who is this? I was blown away immediately.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what set me on. I began to like him like I like Lynch. He became that same.
Yep.
I was like, oh, whoever this is, I've got to know everything. Yeah. And then, of course, I started digging into William S. Burroughs, and that led me to Kerouac. It set me on so many rabbit holes. It was a formative film.
Yeah, I love movies like that where they just really
Yeah.
open up something and then continue like following veins down along. You're just like, oh, we're going over here and over there, and this is coming from this source. Yeah, this was my first theatrical Cronenberg. I
Oh,
was a
yours too.
Yeah, I was a
Oh,
big fan. It played at the Little Art House Theater, and so I had to go. You know, it's another movie where you realize like Cronenberg and Jarmusch, they use time, they slow things down so that moments can really play into you. And Peter Weller is such an incredible actor, and he just like from the time that I saw him talking about moving as Murphy in RoboCop, I realized like, oh, this guy's like a musician, and he is. He's a jazz musician, and so he plays roles like a musician. He's hitting different notes, he's moving different ways, and the way that he portrays this character is so low energy, so subtle that it pulls you in as a viewer. So you are like face to face with this man who's just muttering the quietest, most deadpan lines, and it's just unbelievably gorgeous. Like the way that it's shot, the color tones, the sepia tone and
oh,
everything, just every performance in it I think is perfect. I absolutely love the film, and that you don't know if this stuff is real, if it's really happening or not, but you also buy into that the bugs are typewriters and the mugwumps are there. And man, just seeing the mugwumps and he's like talking to them and they're like actual like puppet things. Now they would just be CG, and I wouldn't believe they're in even in the same room. I mean, they wouldn't even have,
yeah.
built the sets, but like it's so good. Peter Weller's performance is up there with Jeremy Irons in Dead Ringers. It's just they're phenomenal descents. It's just this was one where I was like, I love it. And when it came out on VHS, I probably also may have borrowed the tape from the store and kept it. I just loved it. I had my sampler. I would sample this movie. We did an episode on this film with Patrick Bromley from F This Movie. So people that are listening to this episode, you can go back and listen to that one as well, where I interview him as a writer. So we talk
Yeah.
about life of a writer while talking about the movie Naked Lunch.
I've got to check that episode out, by the way.
Oh yeah,
That's
I love it. I ask him some of my favorite questions in there. The bug where he has to rub the dust on its lips. It's
oh,
just I love so much about this, and I've met people who don't like it. I get it. Not everything has to be for everybody, but for me and for yourself, I can tell it
yeah.
it's a big deal. It's a big one.
It was a game changer.
Yeah.
And it is funny that it's my favorite Cronenberg because it's the one that I get the most negative responses on.
Oh, I have
Like,
the Criterion collection right here.
I was gonna say I have it above my
Nice.
that's it. Yes. And it's the one though that people are like, yeah, I've got the
There it
yeah, it's
is.
good.
Nice.
Yes. But yeah, it's the one that gets the most divisive responses of
Mhm.
Cronenberg for me. It's the way he takes us into the world of William S. Burroughs.
Mhm.
And like you said, we don't know exactly what's real. We don't know what's fantasy, but he approaches his work by building this world and not dividing between the real world and fantasy.
Yeah.
He'll show us scenes that are real and are fantasy, but he's not making a point of which is which.
Yeah, it's my favorite thing.
It was brilliant. At that time, there were not movies doing that.
No, he doesn't
That's
hold your
been done.
hand. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you don't know. When Existence came out after this, um, he does it even more so, where you don't know if
Mhm.
you're in a video game or you're not in
Yes.
a video game. And he does like at the time. Think about this: The Matrix is out, and like all these big budget movies where they're like, take the red pill, take the blue pill. Here's a 3D like crazy wash, so you know you're not in reality or you are in reality. And in here, he's just like, I don't know. There's like some plastic on the floor we're walking through, and you're like, what? What is going on? This,
Yeah.
I don't understand why you're doing this, but it's so smart that you are, and that's what he does in Naked Lunch as well. It's just like, and you just watched Crimes of the Future, right?
Oh my God.
Which
Yeah.
would have
And thank
been Painkiller, which would have been right around this time because that's when he wrote the script for it. And if you put that movie next to like Existence and Naked Lunch and
yes.
Crash, it's like I mean, talk about a crazy run of
I've got
incredibly
Crash
effective
up there
movies.
too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, me
Sitting
too. Yeah.
like we keep coming back to it because you just have to.
Yeah.
What a crazy run. You're right. Crimes of the Future actually blew me away. It makes total sense that he was doing this at that writing
Yeah,
this at that time.
96. Yeah.
The whole outsider
Mm-hmm.
director,
Mm-hmm.
he picked the most outsider of outsider writers to do
Twice.
a movie about. Like they said his work was unfilmable.
Yeah.
And even with the beat writers, he was the outsider.
Yeah.
Like he wrote, he was an openly gay man. His work was all written like stream of consciousness
Mm-hmm.
while under the influence of heroin,
Yeah.
or the equivalent of at that time. Still amazing. I mean, I love his work too. But the fact that Cronenberg picked him, I was like, this just shows who Cronenberg is.
Mm-hmm.
Cronenberg said, well, I don't know what it's like to be, a gay man and to experience these things he was experiencing. He's like, but I could really relate to, he related to the artistic process. And you can tell that was another autobiographical thing for him.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Peter Weller. Oof.
Yeah.
Can you think of anyone in your mind that could play William S. Burroughs better than Peter?
Nope.
No one.
No. That was no way, because they would do a version of William S. Burroughs. And instead, what Peter Weller does is this character that I mean, it's just so gutsy. Like, the amount that he's doing is so little that it makes every eye movement, like, it just, like I said, it pulls you in to this, like, because Cronenberg's going to take his time, so we're going to evolve throughout this film, and you're going to watch Peter Weller, and you think he can't do less, but then he's high, and he's giving you less, but it's still more fascinating. It's such a dance that it's just fascinating. I don't know. I don't know how he does what he does.
Oh man, there's so much, because Judy Davis as his wife, that
stunning, incredible performance.
He doesn't talk about his sexuality and the fact that he was still kind of in the closet at that point. He doesn't really explore all that. He doesn't have to. He doesn't make a point of anything. We have to kind of discover it. But she's amazing as his wife. That whole scene where there's the whipping scene and it turns into the like creature, and the other point I was going to make too. Well, she's amazing. His experience with her and weaving that into the fantasy world, and Cronenberg approaches it like a science fiction movie, not a movie about drug addiction.
Yeah.
Like a fantasy science fiction. That was key, I think.
Yeah.
Like we're going on this journey with him, almost like it wasn't a negative thing. Like he does show the negative side of it, but he didn't really do it in a way that was judging that experience.
Yeah, and it's also another movie like Jarmusch's films where because it's about writing, it's a movie where there's like literature involved. And so it's like, it's so interesting that this is the last of the films that we're talking about, because it brings us back to, Jarmusch's ability to put literary things in there, whether that's the street signs being famous writers or poets, or, it's just like this interesting place that you end up at, even though we're looking at just 5 years and 6 films. It's like, oh, the last one we're talking about kind of has bits and pieces of all these things, whether it's the outsider, the literary elements.
It ties it all together.
It ties it all there. Like, it's all there randomly, and yet not in Naked Lunch.
This is actually really exciting that this happened this week. This is the kind of stuff that really, it's like, it blows my mind. It's exciting to me.
Yeah.
This is like these endless little tributaries. And the fact that it does, you're right. It does tie all of these things together, because it is a movie about writing and about art. And his experiences are all funneled through art and writing. And I like that we don't see necessarily the reality of what's happening in his life. We get pieces of it, but we don't. That's not the point. The point is it's an existential movie.
Yeah, it's existential. It's draped in music. Ornate Coleman swinging for the fences, and so it's just so we start off with Down by Law, where music plays an integral, of course, part in the film, and then it carries on through. We add all these other elements, being the literary and the outsider, and then we end in a place that has all of these like together. And I didn't know if these two filmmakers were even aware of what each other was doing at the time, but it's fascinating.
It's really fascinating. And like when we first started chatting about this, I was like, there's something here. They're a lot more alike than it seems.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, like you said, a perfect example of that. This combines everything that they're doing, both of them.
In different ways, but both I
And
would say
different,
from very genuine places.
absolutely. The score, like you said, it has that. Are you saying Arnett Coleman?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I was listening to the commentary track, and Weller. I didn't know Weller was a musician, and
Yeah. Yeah,
oh
he used
man,
to.
what a
I don't think they still do, but he would play with Jeff Goldblum and some other dudes. They would get together and just play jazz. Can you
how cool
imagine?
would that? Can I be there?
Yeah,
Can I just sit in the corner somewhere?
he's one of those dudes. Every time I've heard him talk, Peter Weller, I'm just like, this dude's so crazy articulate. Some
So
people,
intelligent.
the
Yeah.
way they can harness their normal language that I struggle with is just, I'm just in awe of it every time. Like the way that people will land a sentence, and I'm just like, oh, that would be nice not to just ramble like a idiot like I do sometimes. Like they're just so articulate. I don't know. It's just so impressive. I always wanted to meet him, Peter Weller. But
Yeah, him and yes, him and Cronenberg on a commentary track together. I was
yeah,
like,
that's a must.
talk about two very intelligent people.
Yeah.
Like you said, they're very concise.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if they're reading. They're not reading from things; they're just talking. But
Yeah.
I'm like, I would have to have all of that written out.
Oh, for sure. I have every note written out all the time. And even then, I'm like, I don't know what this says. I don't know who put this down. Yeah, Jarmusch is the same thing. Like those three are great examples of people that like their recall of events or authors or things they read or like it's just what? I mean, okay, well, that's their life. That's not mine for sure. But
No, I agree with you totally. Jarmusch is the same way. Actually, here's another similarity. He doesn't do commentary tracks, but he does the on the Criterion. If you on the Criterion channel, they have the Q&A with him
mm,
after Mystery Train and after Night on Earth and Down by Law. I was listening to this Q&A, and he's so intelligent.
yep.
His like what you said is someone asked him about his literary influences, like you mentioned. He just starts rattling off stuff, and
It's crazy. Yeah.
you can tell he doesn't have notes. He doesn't have, and he's recalling. And it's also like the Buddhist quote, and and he just
Yeah.
and he does this very smooth, flawlessly. Yeah, he's super intelligent too.
Yeah. When he starts talking about movies, I just go, oh, okay. I'm going to sit down because I don't
Oh,
even know some of the things that you're saying. So,
I'm lost, but this is amazing. Yeah,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
Great
When he
stuff.
starts talking about his film influences too, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I'm taking notes. Okay, what?
Oh, and he's someone who's always done that. Like anytime someone talked to him, he's like, "Oh yeah, these are the people that really influenced me. These are the people that like." He's never just like, "Well, I'm a genius that came up with this thing." He's like, "No, I saw this film and then this film and then this film and this influenced me in this way and this did this." And it's just like the honesty. It just like I'm saying when I say he's not putting himself ever on a pedestal. It's like he makes these things that we're together saying in this episode are wonderfully awesome pieces of work, but like he's just like, yeah, I made a thing. You're just like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
okay.
He does though. He is exactly that way. He's like, yeah, and I just kind of thought it was it was a great idea to do this and that. And even more than a lot of filmmakers, he doesn't talk about himself as being because he was a total pioneer, and
Mm-hmm.
he does not ever ever address himself that way
Yeah,
or what his work that way. He's unbelievably humble.
yeah. It's
Like you said,
creepy.
is what his quote, it's not what you take from, it's what you do with it.
Mm-hmm.
As far as taking things from other movies and where you take it to. But he talks a lot about lifting from things, and him and Cronenberg. And Cronenberg is actually, you know what? He's super humble too. Like
Yeah, he's very calm. That guy.
they have very different personalities, but they're very similar.
Yeah.
Cronenberg does make me laugh a lot more though,
Mm-hmm.
just because he's so him.
Yes. Well,
It's
I mean,
so
they're both very specific, unique individuals. But like Cronenberg is so you're ready to be disturbed, and then he says something charming, and you're like, oh, okay. Like I didn't see that coming.
I think it's the fact that he's talking about his films in such a warm,
Mm-hmm.
just lovely, very Canadian,
Yeah.
just nice. And it's talking about Crash.
Right.
And I think that's what makes me laugh about him is that I'm like, man, I love you. You're talking about Naked Lunch and these movies that are dead ringers,
Mm-hmm.
these traumatic movies as just this wonderful expression of love
Yeah,
and
he's like, this
whatever.
is my rom-com, Dead Ringers, everybody.
Yeah, and like you said, he's very calm. This is my
Yeah.
rom-com. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's his,
I don't know.
it's really just a love story.
Yeah. It's a love story through the lens of Cronenberg. So there you have it. Any final thoughts on Naked Lunch?
Like I said, I could really go on. I had to condense this. We've kind of touched on it already, but the way he filmed it, because William S. Burroughs, because I love to write. I became fascinated with his writing after this, and I still am. His stream of consciousness, he makes you follow him on this journey.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't give you a lot of logical signposts, but you're going with it. They said his work was unfilmable. And so Cronenberg's like, well, I'm just going to take pieces of each of your work, and we're going to call it Naked Lunch, but I'm not going to try to film that book.
Right.
I'm going to just film pieces of each of the works you've done, which is brilliant. So that way we go on this ride of it ends up becoming the story. So he filmed it the way that Burroughs writes, which is this sort of stream of consciousness thing. And I don't know how he tapped into that, how he thought that, but that was genius.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the fact that he did that is what makes it so beautiful, the way he approached it, because he really is, if you read Burroughs, his work, it really is, he did such a good job of translating it to a cinematic language where you think it couldn't be. Like there's no way. It was a perfect marriage of minds.
Yeah, I agree. It's completely unique, and I just absolutely love it.
Great. It was, yeah, there's such a great one to close on. That was perfect.
Yeah, it lands. There you have it. That's our time capsule episode. It's all about 2 directors, 5 years, and 6 films. Aaron, thank you for being here. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, AW Bluesman, and that's AWBLUZMAN. Same for Letterboxd, and I try to update that as much as I can. I love Letterboxd. It overwhelms me, but I love it.
Yeah.
And then I'm on Instagram as ABFilmG.
Fantastic. Well, there you go.
Such a pleasure.
Oh, well,
being here.
yeah, thank you for coming on for this. As always, I'm Dirk Marshall, and tune in next time for more variety in movie chat right here on VH Us.